For those of you unfamiliar with Impromptu, the students will be prepping and speaking within the same allotted time. We ask that the room remain silent because they will be up here on stage prepping before they decide to speak. Please silence your cell phones and remain silent during that time. The topic for the final round is WWW, Wise Words of Washington. Please stay seated at the conclusion of the last performance for the introduction of the judging panel and the 6 competitors. Now, our first speaker, contestant S5078. Please come to the stage.
Thank you. Can I undo the cap first?
Our first speaker, contestant S5078, chose the topic, Be Careful What You Allow to Grow in Your Mind, Booker T. Washington. Again, that's Be Careful What You Allow to Grow in Your Mind, Booker T. Washington.
As a young child, I cared a lot about what my older brothers thought of me, whether they thought I was cool or annoying, and whether they wanted to spend time with me, even if it was just to make fun of me. I wanted to earn their approval of what I wore, how I act, and what I participated in. And I cared just as much about what my parents thought of me, to the point that I was no longer living for myself. I was living for the people around me. Booker T. Washington once proclaimed, "Be careful of what you allow to grow in your mind." He's right. In our ever-changing world, we express ourselves through our style, through our own personality, and through our passions. So today, let's discuss just how we do that, but also how society tries to take what makes us away. When I entered middle school, I thought that the coolest thing I could wear was my Galaxy cat leggings and a bright pink t-shirt, because that's what I'd worn for the past 4 years. But I was rudely awakened on the first day of school when every other girl in my class appeared in Lululemon leggings or American Eagle jeans. I felt very left out, but for that first week, I was still confident in myself. I didn't care what they thought, at least not yet. Not until I got my first social media account the next year. I realized that it wasn't just the people in my high school that I didn't look like. I didn't look like anyone else online. And instead of embracing my weird quirks and fun cat earrings that matched my leggings, I told myself that I had to change because I no longer looked like what everyone else expected me to look like. But I still had my personality. I don't know if you can tell, but I love talking. I mean, just like a little bit. And at least where I'm from in my rural community, it's pretty common that when you walk down the street, you smile at the people that you see, which makes me look like an absolute lunatic when I get to the city, and everyone thinks that I'm trying to sell them something. Being friendly was something that I never thought would be my downfall until I started competing in dance. I would go out to competitions and try and make friends. That was always my goal. I knew I didn't have a perfect pirouette, and I knew I couldn't fully reach my splits all the time, but the least I could do was make friends. And that quickly turned away from me. Too many people at competitions see each other as their enemies. Luckily, here, I know they got my back. Unfortunately, that's not how it is on the internet. As a young child, I got Instagram at 12. I wanted to make friends. I wanted to prove that my personality of being friendly wasn't a bad thing. But it was. People didn't like that I talked too much, or that I wanted to express my opinions and share my thoughts with them. And for the next few months, I shut down. Even my mother noticed that I wouldn't talk to people as much because I was ashamed of what they thought of my own personality. And then we reached high school, and suddenly, speech and debate became my passion. I decided that I wanted to talk wherever I could, wearing whatever I wanted. But that too was stripped away from me. I quit dance to pursue forensics. And as a result, I was called every name under the sun. I was boring, I was a nerd, and I was very uncool. I was no longer able to follow through with what I wanted to do. It didn't matter how much I loved my passions. The people around me didn't. And in my school, that meant that it didn't matter just how much I loved what I was doing. It didn't matter if it made me happy. What mattered was what others thought of me. And I let that rule my life. Between what I was wearing, what I was acting like, and what I wanted to do, it seemed like nothing was good enough for the people online or the people that didn't know me. And I know I'm not the only one out there who's gone through this. So how do we fix it? I wish I could magically tell you that I could just shut off my phone and boom, I'm happy. I'm finally happy with myself, with the way I look and what I want to act like. But that's not the reality. There will never be one solution that makes you able to love yourself. But there are things that we can do, like continuing to dress what we want to dress like. Despite the fact that many of my teammates have compared me to the green giant on the cans, my favorite color is green, and I'm gonna wear whatever suit I want to wear. Despite the fact that some people might yell at me for trying to give them a friendly smile, I'm gonna keep doing it. I'm gonna keep being true to myself. And although it may not be cool to do speech and debate, I don't wanna do what everyone else is doing. I didn't get here by doing what everyone else is doing. I'm going to continue to do what I love to do, and that is speech. Just as I hope that all of you continue to do what you want to do forever.
Please welcome up our next speaker, contestant S5676. Our next speaker, contestant S5676, will be with the topic, if you want to lift yourself up, lift up someone else. Booker T. Washington. Again, that's, if you want to lift yourself up, lift up someone else. Booker T. Washington.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, of all the things Christian Bale has given us, whether it's phenomenal performances in A Midsummer Night's Dream or, I don't know, I haven't seen any other Christian Bale movies, but the point is allegedly Christian Bale has given us a lot, but there's perhaps nothing better than what he did with Batman, pioneering the Winter Arc, the ability of Batman going away, no longer fighting crime, and instead focusing on himself. Young men across America adopted it most recently over their past winter. Whether it's bulking up, hitting the gym every day of the week, except all days that end in Y, and furthermore, just kind of being a bit of a bad person. Okay, sorry, the Winter Arc is really annoying if you're not on the Winter Arc yourself. But it's this concept of focusing solely on yourself that is getting a lot of rejection from other individuals. When Booker T. Washington tells us as a community to focus on lifting others, claiming that if you want to lift yourself up, you need to lift someone else, I have to actually disagree with Booker T. Washington here. Yes, I recognize how bad this looks on Juneteenth for the white guy on stage to silence someone like Booker T. Washington, but if you'll bear with me for a second, Booker might be wrong, because oftentimes, when we focus too much on lifting others up, we begin to neglect ourselves. Maybe the Winter Arc is a good thing. Today we'll tackle that for 3 core reasons, recognizing why focusing too much on lifting others up is actually bad for us. First, we'll recognize how we define ourselves by other individuals' standards. Second, we'll look at how we're rejecting our own personal growth, before finally recognizing the benefits in pursuing compromise rather than another individual's success over your own. So, as we start, when we spend too much time talking about other individuals, how we can fix their lives, we start to focus on how they perceive us. This is something that Americans, and especially teenagers, are quite well versed in. As a community, we're really good at thinking about what other individuals think of us. This is certainly getting worse as social media protrudes our lives over and over again. We do a really good job of worrying what other people are thinking about us. When we're focused too much on making others' lives solely better, improving your life because you're gonna be happy, damn it, that starts to weigh off a little bit. When we're so focused on others' enjoyment, then we only think about the perceptions. And oftentimes our perceptions of how others are feeling is worse than our own. In a 2021 St. Louis Federal Reserve analysis, They found that individuals, when rating their own personal economic enjoyment or happiness and feeling about the economy, was relatively high. 75% were satisfied. When they responded as to how they thought the rest of the nation felt, that number dropped to just 20% approval. People always think that you are thinking worse than you actually are. And so when we focus ourselves on others as standards, we begin to only focus on lifting them up rather than what they're actually thinking. Now, the second reason as to why a winter arc might be the right move this year is because it's important to focus on our own individual growth. When we spend all of our time focusing on how we're changing others, what we're doing for other individuals, we neglect personal growth that can happen for ourselves. Obviously, we don't all think we're perfect. At least most of us don't. However, when we focus so much on improving others' lives, there's a lot of necessary growth that needs to happen from within. No, you don't need to get swole this winter. That's not what I'm telling you. Although it doesn't hurt, but my main point is that there are always important goals of individual growth that need to be emphasized. When we focus too much on improving others rather than ourselves, we neglect the personal growth that needs to happen. Now, our third and final reason as to why the winter arc is definitely the move, y'all, is because when we focus too much on lifting others up, we lose the real way to actually do it, and that's compromise. In order to grow as individuals, both yourself and others, we need a symbiotic relationship. You need to gain something from that, and they need to gain something from that. Because when it's only one individual gaining, all you're seeing is something that is purely parasitic. We need to redefine our relationships with other individuals to represent mutual beneficency. Because when we neglect doing so, we suffer and they suffer. Because a lot of times when all we're looking to do is totally get down on our knees and make the world the best possible way for the other individual, we begin to sacrifice ourselves and often their enjoyment. It's not super fun to have someone give everything to you. You don't feel good about them doing that. And as a result, as a community, we become worse off. By no longer focusing on compromise, we're made worse for it. And so as we close here, although I might not be able to name any Christian Bale movies, sorry guys, and sorry Christian, what I will be able to tell you is that it's important to focus less on only improving others' lives, but rather on individual growth. Today, we'll disagree with Booker T. Washington. Sorry, I know, bad timing. And that's because of what happens when we focus solely on lifting others up. One, because we define ourselves on others' perceptions. Secondly, because oftentimes we neglect our own personal growth. And third and finally, because we no longer focus on compromise. And so maybe this winter, focus a little bit on yourself. Thank you.
Please welcome up our next speaker, contestant S5104. Contestant S5104 will be speaking over the quotation, "We must reinforce argument with results." It's by Booker T. Washington. Again, that's "We must reinforce argument with results," Booker T. Washington.
Most people imagine hell as this fiery place where the souls of the damned go. But for me, hell is Manchester High School on Wednesday morning with all the sup kids. I mean, come on. But a lot of people realize that the world today can kind of suck. In fact, right now, we have the most wars going on since World War I. But today, on Juneteenth, we're addressing a quote by civil rights icon Booker T. Washington. The quote is, "We must reinforce argument with results." And we'll analyze this quote through 3 examples. First, the example of Nelson Mandela. Second, the example of the United Nations. And third, the example of the greatest politician alive, myself. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. Why? Because he was protesting against the apartheid system in South Africa. In South Africa, the white Afrikaner minority completely took away the rights of the black majority. Nelson Mandela didn't just sit along and go with this. He protested, never using violence. And for that, the government put him in prison for 27 years. However, the story of Nelson Mandela didn't end with that. Nelson Mandela got out of prison, became the president of South Africa, and ended the apartheid system over there. And returning back to the quote by Booker T. Washington, "We must reinforce argument with results," Nelson Mandela reinforced his argument with results through success politically and for advocating for equality. So overall, when you're judging the legacy of a historical figure like Nelson Mandela or anyone else, don't talk about all the rhetoric. Talk about what they actually accomplished. But speaking of failing, I didn't even octo in international extemp. Let's just say my ego got shattered. But another failure in our world today is the United Nations. Yes, really controversial. But think about it. Just a few years ago, the United Nations made Iran, a country which oppresses its citizens every day, as the chair of a human rights committee. I mean, come on! What were you thinking? But beyond that, we put all our stock into multilateral organizations like the UN, like they're gonna preserve human rights. But these organizations are all talk, no action. They give us yapathons without results. And when we return back to the quote by Booker T. Washington, that we must reinforce argument with results, we can clearly see that the United Nations is not doing that. So, when you go to cast your ballot in the 2026 midterms, or wherever you are from, no matter the state or country, vote on the politician who will actually achieve something instead of just giving yapathon speeches. But back to the greatest politician alive, myself, I like to say that I'm a pretty successful person until I didn't break in international extemp. I spent an entire year practicing speeches, doing draws, 30-minute prep periods, only to not octo when the moment needed me to octo. So, did I give up? No. I entered into Impromptu, and as you know, I'm talking to you right now. But this is exactly how this example connects back to the quote by Booker T. Washington. Once again, the quote is, "We must reinforce argument with results." And I did tell my team before nationals that I was gonna final. Apparently I didn't lie, and this just proves my argument. When I set my mind to do something, I achieved it. If I just talked and didn't final, well, not only would I be a liar, but I would also be disappointing the great civil rights leader, Booker T. Washington. So if you fail, don't break an extemp or any other category, go into supplementals, and just remember, there will be other tournaments where you can final or maybe win. And don't give up. We are all successful leaders in this room, and we can all achieve our dreams. Overall, these nationals were kind of a fever dream. especially Manchester High School on Wednesday morning. Maybe Dante should have wrote about it. However, today we analyzed a quote by civil rights leader Booker T. Washington. We must reinforce argument with results, and we looked at this quote in 3 separate ways. Firstly, a successful politician who did reinforce his argument with results. Secondly, a non-successful organization which yaps about human rights but puts Iran in charge of protecting them. And thirdly, for myself. So overall, when you're assessing an argument or something that someone's saying, assess it by its merits, not by the way it sounds. And remember, assess me both by my merits and how good I sound. Thank you.
Please, at this time, welcome up our next contestant, code S5184. Contestant S5184 has selected the quotation, "Associate yourself with people of good quality, for it is better to be alone than in bad company." Booker T. Washington. Again, that's associate yourself with people of good quality, for it is better to be alone than in bad company. Booker T. Washington.
You see, right now, I'm just trying to take everything in, because as a graduated senior, this is going to be the last ever impromptu I ever do. You know, I kept saying that in my earlier rounds and not expecting that I'd get here, and then I got here, so I was kind of lying in all my other rounds. But now that I'm here, I'm feeling a lot of emotions, anxiety, my hands can't stop shaking, happiness that I'm here, and I constantly keep saying to myself, don't throw up, don't throw up, don't throw up, don't throw up. And if I do, hopefully the NSDA will cut it out, and if I really do, then don't worry, the chunks are just waffles. But today, I want to talk about a story that I've kind of avoided talking about, because every time I do, my team makes fun of me. You see, when I was in the 9th grade, I transferred schools, and it was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Like, you watch movies like Mean Girls and you think you're gonna walk in and be the prettiest, coolest person there. Yeah, I wasn't the prettiest or the coolest person there. In fact, I think on my first day of school, I ate lunch alone. But then, I saw a poster on the wall, and on the activity fair, I saw a bunch of people sitting around a table. It was the speech and debate people. You see, today, when I looked at Booker T. Washington's quote, "It's better to be in good company than to be alone with bad company," I thought about the fact that oftentimes we have to surround ourselves with the people that we know will take care of us, that will help us be amazing people. Because when we know this, we can achieve three key things. First, we can overcome the patriarchy. Second, we can prove others wrong. Or third, we can reclaim stolen land. But first, let's talk about how when we understand that you have to keep yourself in good company, you can overcome the patriarchy. See, Simone de Beauvoir is the feminist icon of all feminist icons. In 1907, she wrote *The Second Sex*, the first ever piece of feminist literature. And at the time, that was completely unheard of. She was a teacher, one of the first ever at the University of France, and she noticed something that not a lot of her male counterparts noticed. The fact is, a lot of the women there were overperforming in comparison to the men. Higher test scores, better grades, etc., etc. And so she wrote *The Second Sex*, but she wasn't sure if she wanted to publish it. See, she was afraid of backlash. And she knew that she had to keep herself in good company, like Booker T. Washington does today. And because she did that, because she talked to a group of amazing people, she was able to gain the confidence that it took to publish *The Second Sex*, revolutionizing women's rights in France and helping overturn laws like no-fault divorce and overcoming the patriarchy. Next, let's talk about a group of women who, despite all odds, overcome the impossible. See, I'm brown. I don't know if you guys noticed that for the people who don't see color. But growing up, I always saw and heard stories about the partition between India and Pakistan. And amidst this partition, there were a lot of smaller villages that kind of were overlooked, including the Chipka village. See, this is a small village, not a lot of resources and not a lot of people there. But there did have one abundant resource: timber. And this timber was important for them. It was their food, it was their shelter, and when massive tycoon seasons happened, they needed the leaves from these trees. And then, due to all of the instability in this area, massive billionaire tycoons tried to take the lumber away from them. These people were in good company, because instead of following the government's obligations, they stayed in that community. They knew instead of being alone and in this area, they had to come together. And because they came together, they did something so cute. They hugged the trees. They hugged the trees for like 5 years. It was in their school schedules. People would go during lunch. They literally hugged these trees for as long as they could because they knew that they were in good company. And when they knew they were in good company, they knew they could accomplish anything they wanted. Finally, let's talk about people who knew that when they were in good company, they could overcome even the most struggling scenarios. So my friend earlier talked about Iran. And during the Iran evolution, a lot of the women there were oppressed. I am a Muslim woman myself. I talked about being brown earlier, but I'm also Muslim. That's not something people always assume because I don't wear hijab and I'm kind of wearing a shorter skirt that my mom is probably screaming me at. Sorry, Mom, this was the only clean suit I had left. But see, the women in Iran knew that they were in good company because even amidst all of this oppression, they wore white hijabs on White Wednesday. For 30 years, in face of terroristic regimes, they wore these white burqas and hijabs. And in an area where people were killed for way less, they did this small act of good deeds. Because they knew this, because they knew that they were in good company, they were able to do this. So today, on the day of Juneteenth, we talked about 3 amazing women of colors as we remember the past fellow people of color. We looked at today's Booker T. Washington quotes. It's better to be in good company and good qualities than to be alone with bad company. So we looked at these 3 amazing people, and I'm constantly reminded about how lucky I am to have been with my amazing speech friends, because that is probably the best company I'll ever have.
Okay, please welcome up our next speaker, contestant S5481. Contestant S5481 will be speaking over the quotation, "I shall allow no man to belittle my soul by making me hate him." Is Booker T. Washington. That's again, "I shall allow no man to belittle my soul by making me hate him." Booker T. Washington.
In 5 years' time, I'll see you in Cobb County Jail. These are the words that Jaylen Brown's own high school teacher told him just months before he graduated. Now, 10 years later, Jaylen Brown is as far from prison as he possibly could be, as an NBA player with over 5 All-Star titles, as well as the youngest person to have ever lectured at Harvard University. Yet, despite the fact that his teacher doubted him so much, purely because he was a black man in the American school system, he has commented multiple times about how little he holds that against her. He has held almost no hate for the people in his life who have doubted him, instead channeling all of his energy towards positive experiences and making sure that he can give back to equally underprivileged communities to afford other people the same opportunities. Because he realized the lesson afforded to us by today's Booker T. Washington quote, "I will allow no man to belittle my soul by making me hate him." We have to recognize that we channel our energy on hate of any kind. It completely takes away our ability to do real good in the world because we become so absorbed that we stop realizing what really matters. And we will firstly see this through an example of finding out what it takes to change people's minds to stop hatred. Secondly, an example of separating ourselves from the hate of our past in order to improve our future. Before, finally, an example of realizing that hating the world will only leave us worse off. But as we look at the first reason, why making sure that we understand that not hating other people is actually the easiest way that we can get them to become better, we have to look at the story of Olado Aquino, one of the most famous authors of the 1800s, because he is the main reason that slavery was banned in England. As a slave who wrote a book about how he traveled across the Middle Passage and was eventually able to escape. When he educated himself and returned to England, he had one goal in mind: making sure that the slave trade was entirely gotten rid of. But he didn't do that filled with hate in his heart. Despite the terrible experiences that had been put on him by essentially everybody in England, he was constantly reaffirming how much he loved the country. And even though that was probably a lie, given how much of a colonial regime they were, he understood that coming across as hateful and letting that dominate him would not allow him to change anybody's mind. So, in his book, he was consistently talking about the terrors while making sure that people knew that he didn't hate them. He was successful exactly because of that, and was able to get Parliament to vote almost unanimously on an issue that ended up skyrocketing the abolition movement to something that became popular worldwide. But the second reason why we have to understand that it does belittle your soul by allowing another person to make you hate them, we have to look at the story of Madeleine L'Engle, who was able to overcome other people's expectations by recognizing that only in being truly happy and passionate can she too command her own story. Because from the age of 6 years old, she had constantly been told that she would never be a successful author by her parents and everyone else alike, purely because she was a woman. But Madeleine L'Engle knew how true her passion was. Even though other people had tried to convince her otherwise, by the age of 30, she finally knew enough about the world to recognize that even if other people were giving her reasons to hate them, if she was finally able to focus on what truly gave her joy and happiness, she would not only be truer to herself, but able to inspire everybody else. So, enduring rejection over 12 times from 12 different publishers, she was eventually able to get her book, A Wrinkle in Time, out into the world. Now, it's loved by millions of school children today who likewise understand that no matter where they came from or how people have tried to take their hate and put it onto you, they can still be successful. Because allowing yourself to be dominated by hate, no matter how justified it might be, will keep you pressed down in ways that you might never recover from. But when we look at the final reason, by making sure that we can escape from hate, specifically in reference to the entire world and luck itself, we can come back from almost any failure. And to do this, we have to look at the story of Thomas Carlyle, an author and historian from back in the 1830s who basically had every reason to hate the world. Because the second he had finished what he thought was his life's work, a book titled The French Revolution, A History, which he thought would not only bring popularity back to history, but inspire countless others to take up their love of reading as well, he sent his only manuscript over to his best friend, whose maid mistook it for a pile of trash and threw it in the fireplace. He was left with nothing of his old work and was forced to either quit, as almost all of us would have, or sit back down and keep trying. But he could only do that if he didn't have hatred. And so he chose not to be angry at the world and instead fulfill his own passion. And in doing so, was able to create a book that was fiery and directly from the heart in a way that had never been before seen. So when we return back to today's Booker T. Washington quote, we have to understand that no matter the very valid reasons the world and other people give us to hate them, it is in escaping from that urge and allowing our souls to be purged of that very negative emotion that we not only find fulfillment in ourselves, but have the opportunity to make other people's lives better. So, even if your teacher tells you you're going to end up in jail in 5 years' time, as long as you're able to step forward and understand that you still have value, you too can do anything.
Please welcome our next speaker, contestant S5430. Contestant S5430 will be speaking over the quotation. Oh, this one. One moment. Can I have those two?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, you're all right. Just pick three
Pick
more.
three more?
Yeah.
Redo.
Okay, for real this time. Contestant S5430 will be speaking over the quotation, "We all should rise above the clouds of ignorance, narrowness, and selfishness." Booker T. Washington. Yeah. A very quotable person. Again, that's "we all should rise above the clouds of ignorance, narrowness, and selfishness." Booker T. Washington.
My family is big on reality TV, whatever category you can think of. Cooking, Great British Bake Off is on every night. Fashion, RuPaul's Drag Race is a staple. And back to cooking. My mom thinks she could beat Bobby Flay. But trust me, she can't. Sorry if you're watching, Mom. But my favorite thing about reality TV is how it illuminates our flaws. One in particular of mine is my judginess. Again, back to RuPaul, I'm watching that thinking I could lip sync better than RuPaul herself. Which again, I can't. But ultimately, the importance of leaving my judgmentalness behind is illuminated in today's Booker T. Washington quote. We should all rise above our narrowness, selfishness, and ignorance. And ultimately, what we can take away from this quote is that while we all must persevere through hardship, we must all also come on the other side as better people. Today, we are going to see this through three key examples. My favorite movie of the 2025 film season, Sinners. Next, through Harriet Tubman's awe-inspiring life, before finally discussing The Diary of Anne Frank. Now, beginning with Sinners, which the only real sin is that it didn't win Best Picture at the Oscars. Leonardo DiCaprio, you've had enough. But what Sinners shows us is a story of two young black men who were born in a highly segregated town in the bayou. When they escape, they are not left with bitterness. In fact, they go back to that very town once they accumulate wealth to reinvest it in the community. Well, I wouldn't blame them if they stayed ignorant and hateful. In fact, they see beyond that, and they go back to help the very people who helped them in the beginning. They go back to see their mother and father's grave, and they go back to spread wealth into the community. One of the best scenes of the movie is when one of the characters, Smoke, gives $100 to a young girl and teaches her how to advocate for himself. he does not go back to the town with bitterness in his heart. He goes back to the town that hated him so much, and he shows them what it means to reinvest and to rise above. Now, and a much realer example is Harriet Tubman. Now, many of us know her from her work on the Underground Railroad, but what I think I know her best from is from her selflessness. Now, she's a figure we have all learned about, but one thing that I have always admired more than anything about her is her courage. When she escaped slavery, it would have been easy for her to never go back to the South. But a quote that has always stuck with me from her is, "I have heard their sighs and groans. I have seen their tears, and I would give every drop of vein in my blood to free them." Clearly, she understood what it meant to rise above selfishness. Not that it would have been selfish for her to stay in the free North, but that she was able to use courage and perseverance to come out of the other side of slavery a better person, and someone who was willing to build a community with that rising above. She is someone I think we can all look to when we see what it means to rise above danger and difficulty. Now, ultimately, no one embodies this Booker T. Washington quote more than Anne Frank. I first read the diary of Anne Frank when I was 12 years old, and seeing the writing of another 12-year-old from my young perspective was life-changing. She wrote about how she did not hate the Nazis. She did not hate anyone. In fact, she was able to rise above their ignorance with her love and respect for people around her. In the end, she wrote, "In spite of everything, I still think people are really good." If that is not an example of rising above selfishness, ignorance, and narrow-mindedness, I don't know what is. Ultimately, what we can take from this amazing story of Anne Frank's lack of hatred is that we should all take the loss of life not for vain, but for a chance to rise above, just like she did. So, while reality TV has definitely illuminated some flaws in me, in future, I think we should all look back to this Booker T. Washington quote, because ultimately, we must all rise above narrow-mindedness, selfishness, and ignorance. So today, we learned that through 3 key examples. First, how in my favorite film of the 2025 film season, Sinners, illuminated how we must go back without hate in our hearts to change the systems that hurt us. Second, through Harriet Tubman, who illuminated how she can go back to her system in the real world, how she can change and grow and build, before finally discussing Anne Frank, a person who had every reason to hate the world around her and rose above ignorance anyway. So again, I'm sorry for saying I hate your cooking, Mom. I promise I don't. But you still can't beat Bobby Flay. But ultimately, I think we all need to rise above our own judgments, narrow-mindedness, and ignorance. Oh, don't worry.
All right, please welcome to the stage the 6 finalists and their coaches in Impromptu.
Your winners in Impromptu, presented by Bob and Sally Stockton, are: in 6th place, Sienna Stouts from Wrightstown High School in Wisconsin, coached by David Winkler. In 5th place, Ash Klon from Mounds Park Academy in Minnesota, coached by Tanner Sunderman. In 4th place, Jacob Dabrowski from Catholic Memorial School in Massachusetts, coached by Ryan Julian and brother Anthony K. Cabot. Placing 3rd in Impromptu, receiving a $250 scholarship, is Simon Forbes from Orono High School in Minnesota, coached by Sasha Rathke and Nicole Berg. Placing second in impromptu, receiving a $500 scholarship, is Theo Campen from Wheaton Warrenville South High School in Illinois, coached by Matthew Dudak and Dave DeMarzo.
Zoya, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, the champion in impromptu, receiving a $1,000 scholarship from Bob and Sally Stockton, is Zoya Siddiqui from Downers Grove South High School in Illinois. Zoya is coached by Justin Matkovich, Jan Heiteen, and Elegy Wilson.